Yo, how's it going, guys? I am back with another my thoughts on insert the UFC card. In this case, we're gonna have UFC Fight Night 266, also known on social media as UFC Vegas 113. Mario Bautista versus Oliveira, Vinicius Oliveira. So I'm not gonna spend a ton of time on this card. Obviously, it's not the most stacked event, being a fight night, being at the Apex, especially. We're used to seeing these events not be so great, but there are some fun fights to talk about. So I'm mainly going to focus main event, co-main event, and then swiftly move through the rest of the card for any bouts that sort of catch my attention. So without further ado, here are my thoughts on UFC Vegas 113. All right, so we start with the main event of the card. It is a bout at 135 pounds where we'll see top contender Mario Bautista take on rising contender Vinicius Oliveira. Bautista enters as a decent favorite, minus 174, and Vinicius Oliveira as the underdog at plus 136. This is not a fight that's going to determine the next contender or title contender at 135 pounds, but certainly a fight that could start pushing the winner towards a big fight that could potentially down the line get him a bigger fight. So certainly an important fight at 135 pounds, but not an elite level fight. When I say elite level, I always refer to the top 5 of the division. Obviously, if we're looking at the rankings right now, Mario Bautista ranked number 9 and Vinicius Oliveira ranked number 11. So these guys are basically fighting to get closer for an opportunity at a top 5 opponent down the line. Still, nonetheless, a pretty good matchup, exciting bout. I think it makes sense for both at this point in their careers. Obviously, with a lot more to gain for Vinicius Oliveira, who's taking a more established fighter in Bautista. Bautista might be sort of taking a step down in competition, but that's kind of sort of what you expect coming off a loss. And look, coming off a defeat, he got a main event. So I think it makes sense for him. It's not a bad deal here that he got. All in all, I think this is a fun fight. I think the better fighter or the sturdier fighter, I think that I like that word to describe this fighter, is Mario Bautista. Vinicius Oliveira is very good, very skilled. Actually, one of my favorite fighters at 135. That's like on the come up. I think he's fun as hell to watch. He puts on exciting fights. He can hit you with crazy stuff and put you out. He's a fun guy to watch. Now, Bautista, not so much. He's not a boring fighter, but he can be, depending on the matchup. And I do think that this is a fight that may call that from him. This is not a fight where he can afford to be a little bit careless, a little bit flashy. We know that if there is an easy or a safe path to victory, he's often doesn't have a problem in taking it. Some fighters do. Some fighters prioritize excitement and putting on a show over sort of going the safe route. Mario Bautista is not one of those. If he has to put on a fairly not so exciting fight or boring fight, he'll do that, so long as he gets the win, of course. But still, he can be exciting at times. So we'll see if Vinicius Oliveira brings that out of him. I tend to think he won't, but you never know. It is a 5-round fight, so a lot can happen within that time frame. And I do agree with the odds here. Mario should be a decent favorite, and he is. If I had to pick, I think the end result here is going to be Mario Bautista by decision. I have a hard time seeing him finishing Vinicius Oliveira, and I think Vinicius Oliveira, I still have questions about wrestling and getting pressed against the cage. Now, he fought to a split decision in his last fight against, no, sorry, not in his last fight, but in his fight prior to Said Nurmagomedov. I think it's pronounced Said. Sorry, it wasn't a split decision. It was a unanimous decision. But it was a fight of the night, and it was a fight where Said did have some success in the wrestling and pressing Vinicius. He did end up losing, but I do think a lot has to be made about his cardio. That's a guy that, for whatever reason, I'm sure he trains hard, but just doesn't have it in him to fight these longer, grueling fights that require a lot from him. And yet, he kind of gave him some trouble in some areas. So I do think Mario Bautista, who is stronger in my mind, who definitely has better cardio, he's proven that. I think he's going to be able to push the pace, avoid any chaos, any crazy stuff. He's also got a good chin. He's also hard to submit. And I do think he's going to be able to control large portions of this fight. enough to get him a decision victory. So that's kind of how I'm seeing this bout. Now, for the sake of the division, I do think the best thing here, and again, this is not me wishing bad on Bautista, but I do think that for the sake of the division, it is better that Vinicius Oliveira gets his hand raised on Saturday. He is the more exciting fighter. I don't know how far back in terms of being in the good graces with fans did Bautista's performances against Aldo and Mix sort of set him back. You know, they weren't the most exciting fights. So I don't know. I do think the upside here promotionally wise is an Oliveira. If he wins, man, you got a really exciting contender. He more or less would be your John Silva of the bantamweight division, and we know how valuable John Silva has become for the UFC at 45. So we'll see what ends up happening. But my pick is going to be on Bautista winning a decision. All right, now we move on to the co-main event of the card, and this fight I'm very excited for. I do think this is the best fight of the card. It is a flyweight matchup between Amir Albazi and Kyoji Horiguchi. Right now, Kyoji Horiguchi is ranked number 8 in the division with only 1 win since his return to the UFC, and Amir Albazi is ranked number 6. So just in terms of rankings alone, these numbers indicate you that this fight means more and is more important than the main event. I do wonder, perhaps Mario, I think at this point he did deserve one, but in terms of what fight holds more weight in the respective division, there's no doubt that this co-main event has a little bit more weight. So as we are looking at the odds here, Amir Albazi enters as a heavy underdog plus 290, and Kyoji Horiguchi as a heavy favorite at minus 410. Basically no value if you are a betting man. So yeah, this one's gonna be interesting. I am not as confident on this pick. I am going with Kyoji Horiguchi. I went with him in his UFC debut. I thought he was going to look great. I picked him as an underdog. And I think the lines are a little bit overblown because of the expectations he surpassed in his return. Now, Amir Albazi hasn't fought in a while, and the last time he fought, he lost to Brandon Moreno. But he's a guy that can wrestle. He's a guy that has experience. And Kyoji has been out wrestled before in the past, has had issues with guys that are bigger than him. Now, that's usually been at 135. This being at flyweight, I would assume a lot of those issues will be gone. I don't know how long can Amir Albazi hold them down, but I don't think it's crazy to think that Albazi ties him up and you know, gets some decent control, maybe not so much damage. And then maybe steals around, and who knows if the judging's terrible that night, which can be, maybe gets a controversial split decision win or something. I think that's definitely in the cards. But still, I do think all in all, the better fighter who's in the better career momentum, career moment is Kyoji Horiguchi. So that should be your pick in terms of picking winners and losers. Now, this fight, unlike the main event, I think, as I mentioned, I do think I think it holds more weight, and thus I do think that it has some title implications. Now, I don't think the winner here is guaranteed a shot at the champion, Joshua Van, especially if Amir Albazi wins. I would be shocked if his next fight ends up being a title fight. But Kyoji Horiguchi, on the other hand, is an interesting cat. You know, he's coming off a finish in his UFC return. He's obviously a former UFC title challenger, former Bellator champion, rising champion, well known. If the UFC has interest in going back to Japan, I know Tatsuro Taira is Japanese, but I would imagine, again, I'm not Japanese, as you guys can see and probably can tell by my accent, but I would assume because of the legacy, the history, because he fought in Rising, Kyoji's probably the more popular fighter. So if, you know, there's ever a situation where they want to go to that part of the world, you know, I think Kyoji would have sort of that card under his sleeve in order to kind of vouch for a shot. Plus, he'd be 2-0. He seems to be well liked. Again, he would have to do something crazy here. And for whatever reason, Manuel Cap or Tatsuro Taira maybe would have issues with whatever date they're trying to plan Joshua Van in his first title defense. Now, remember also, Pantoja's back in the gym training. We don't know the exact health of his arm, but he seems to have recovered in a way that we didn't expect. We thought he was going to be out for a while, and he's already doing pull-ups, push-ups, and things that we didn't expect him to be doing so soon after the injury. So who knows? I mean, right now the division's wide open. The title shot could go in an immediate rematch to Alexander Pantoja. It could go to Menno Kopp. It could go to Tatsuro Taira, and maybe the fourth guy there kind of lagging behind everyone. But you never know how the tide can turn. I think Kyoji Horiguchi also has a small case. We'll see. But yeah, fun fight. Like the main event, I do think there is a clear result here in terms of what's better for the promotion, and that is for Horiguchi to win. Man, it sets up some really, really fun fights for him. He's definitely a great and a very good addition to the flyweight category, and yeah, I don't know how much the fans have been getting behind Albazi. Obviously, he's a good fighter, but certainly I don't think he's as beloved as Kyoji is. So see what happens here. I see Kyoji winning. Amir Albazi's tough, man. I don't know if he gets finished. Although Kyoji can hit hard, tough guy as well, good striking, unorthodox as well. He can give some people issues. But I think most likely this will go to the cards and it'll be a win for the Japanese fighter, Kyoji Horiguchi. All right, so that is sort of the bulk of the analysis. But real quick, I do want to go over some fights going on down on this card. Pretty interesting seeing Jailton Almeida take on Rizvan Kuniev. Not interesting in terms of the fight itself. I fear it's going to be not great. I think it's going to be quite boring. But that's not what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that it's an exciting fight, and the winner here could sort of spice up a little bit the heavyweight division. But, you know, I'm not going to hold my breath for that one. I will say this may not be on paper a do or die for Jailton Almeida. Yes, he's coming off a loss against Volkov, but prior to that, he had won 2 in a row. The dude is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-2 in his UFC run. That's not necessarily a run that screams, hey, you need to win this one or we're going to cut you. But his last fight against Volkov was dreadful. And yes, it takes 2 to tango. I think Volkov can hold some blame for that, but the majority of the blame does fall on Jailton because he was the guy that dictated where the fight went, that dictated the rhythm of the fight. And whenever he had some dominant positions to either finish the fight and kind of put everyone out of their misery or make it exciting by delivering damage, he chose not to, which is a very Damian Maia approach. Now, Damian Maia had 6 submissions, and there was always that threat of being submitted. So at least there was some excitement for the people that appreciate grappling. But in that fight with Volkov, which I thought, by the way, was a robbery, I scored it for Jailton Almeida. It was really just control. He had no intention of throwing out there a submission, advanced positions, or anything like that. It was one of the worst fights we've seen in recent memory. So the UFC at this point, with how much strength they've picked up and pretty much almost becoming a monopoly in the industry, they can afford to let go high-level fighters if they're not exciting. They really can. I mean, look at Mukaev. Like, okay, go fight for somebody else. Who else has a flyweight division? Who else is going to use you to compete against us, right? That doesn't exist anymore. Maybe I guess you can still say the PFL, but even then, I think the PFL has lost a lot of momentum. But at some point, certainly Bellator would have done that. But yeah, with the way things are going, if Jailton loses or wins, but specifically if he loses and it happens to be very boring, it wouldn't shock me if the UFC decides to part ways with him. I hope not. That's not what I'm throwing out there that in terms of me wanting to see it. Not at all, but I'm just saying, knowing how the UFC works. So curious to see how Jailton Almeida bounces back. If I were his manager, I'd be screaming at him. Dude, put on a show. Do some damage. You have to do something big here. We got to sort of erase. You probably can't do it entirely, but as much as we can, erase that loss to Volkov because it was very bad, man. All right, we also got some other fun bouts here. Michael Olenjachuk versus, I believe that's how you pronounce his last name, Marc-Andre Barriault. That's going to be a fun fight. There's going to be a finish. probably on Michael's side, but I think either guy is game here for getting the knockout. The Basharat brothers are fighting, so that's fun. What else interests me? Dustin Jacoby can always deliver a good knockout win, so watch out for him. A fight that I'm looking forward to, and this might be my hipster pick, a women's strawweight bout. And I know a lot of people might roll their eyes, but Bruna Brasilia versus Ketlin Souza. I gotta say, Ketlin Souza is a very, very underrated fighter. She is a power puncher. She's got legit power, and that's hard to find at 115 pounds. She's not the best fighter in the roster. She's got a 2-3 record. But she can crack, man, and she moves forward. And I always respect a fighter like that. And there's a certain type of fighter that comes from Brazil that sort of has that DNA, right? Like I think of John Lineker. I think of Vanderlei Silva. There's a specific John Silva. There's a specific fighter that comes out of Brazil that has that specific style. Even a Jessica Andrade, right? Like these people that have a tough chin, heavy punches, stocky build, and they just go out there and throw hooks to try to blow your head out. So yeah, this could be fun. This could be a low-key banger, so watch out for that. And that's pretty much it. That's kind of what I have highlighted here in terms of what interests me on the preliminary card. All right, folks, that is all. Those are my thoughts on UFC Vegas 113. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this card. What are some fights you're looking forward to? And give me some picks. What are your predictions as well? I'll be continuing the betting best bets segment that will be publishing tomorrow on the channel. Now, I have to do a big bounce back because last week, in terms of the picks, they were horrible. I picked the winners right, but because I went props, I did not pick the right method of victory. So let's hope that this Saturday we'll level that record out and start fresh. Like always, subscribe, like the video, and catch you on the next one.